Welcome to the Cyber 3, where we talk about cybersecurity three things at a time. I'm joined today by Dakota Cary, who is a China focused consultant at SentinelOne and a non resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub. Dakota, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so, there's been a lot of news recently about China specific cyber threats. And, we've heard all about the different typhoons, the Salt, Flax, Volt typhoon. And these have been, essentially behind major cybersecurity espionage attacks or attacks on critical infrastructure in the US. But so the China threat is very prominent right now. But, what's really interesting is kind of the conditions that have led to this sort of blossoming ecosystem. Would love to learn more about what goes into kind of the policy making that supports and bolsters that ecosystem. So, can you tell us your three biggest government policies that you're seeing right now shaping China's hacking ecosystem?
Yeah, the first would be the regulation on the management of software vulnerabilities, which requires the disclosure of software vulnerabilities to the PRC government. The second would be competition policy that bolsters the participation and hosting of capture the flag competitions for cybersecurity students and professionals across China. And then the third would be the revamp of Chinese cybersecurity curriculum at degree granting institutions, so universities in China, and the designation of some of those universities as world-class cybersecurity schools.
Right. So just picking those apart really quickly, can you tell us a little bit more about the reporting disclosure requirement? I think that came out, it's a few years old now, 2021 maybe. What
That's right.
sort of impact are we seeing there specifically on kind of the threat ecosystem and what that's meant for China's positioning as a digital cybersecurity, powerhouse, I guess?
Yeah, that's actually how they would prefer to be referred to themselves as a cyber powerhouse. That was a policy that Xi Jinping set out when he came into office in the 20 teens. China's regulation on the management of software vulnerability, as you mentioned, came into effect in 2021, and it requires companies that are, quote, doing business in China to provide information about software vulnerabilities to the Ministry of Industry and Information Technologies databases within 48 hours of discovery. There is not an affirmative requirement for researchers to provide vulnerabilities directly to the government, but it does create a gag rule on researchers publishing about those vulnerabilities, effectively creating the option to say, you can tell the company that is going to tell us, or you can tell us, but you can't tell anyone else and you can't talk about it, and you can't release a proof of concept for that vulnerability until a patch is available. And so the result is the Chinese government is now collecting a number of software vulnerabilities that it previously did not have access to because they existed in the private market. And they're also doing so for $0. They are not remitting payment to these researchers or the companies for providing the vulnerabilities. And so that has provided a big boost to their offensive capabilities.
That's really interesting. And then on the flip side, have you seen any sort of ramifications from this policy kind of across other countries, across organizations globally that you can see at this point?
There are countries that are considering laws that are similar to China that mandate the reporting of software vulnerabilities
Mhm.
to their governments. Those have not been enacted in any widespread fashion. And there are concerted conversations among Western governments about how to adjust our policy apparatus under a kind of China's new regime without copying it outright just because it flies kind of in the face of democratic values.
Right. That makes sense. To your second point about kind of the government sponsored capture the flag contests, hacking contests, can you talk a little bit about that and what sort of ecosystem that cultivates specifically for kind of China's workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an old policy document from 2011, 2012 that talks about how at the time China was finding hackers like finding flowers in a field of wheat. It was really hard to identify who was good at offensive hacking. They didn't really have a professionalized system for identifying and training this talent. And so after Xi Jinping comes into power, one of the things that he does in 2018 is the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, the Cyberspace Administration of China, and the Ministry of Public Security put out an announcement in 2018. Eugenio Benincasa and I covered this in our paper, Capture That Flag, that encourages government ministries to host hacking competitions in order to bolster this talent pipeline development. And this pairs with the degree and workforce development that we'll talk about in the third section. But suffice to say, these government ministries have an incentive and a directive to host hacking competitions in order to provide students and professionals who are already, mid-career, the opportunity to hone the offensive and defensive skills in a competition environment. Money is remitted. There are hosts of these competitions are cybersecurity companies or product companies, et cetera. And what our paper shows is that over the last decade, China has grown to host more than 50 annually recurring capture the flag competitions. Many of those are sponsored by government ministries, either at the provincial or the central government level. And a handful of those are tied to security institutions. So the Ministry of Public Security, the Ministry of State Security, and the People's Liberation Army all host their own capture the flag competitions. And in many cases, we identified avenues for talent identification and recruitment. And so not only are these individuals getting the chance to practice their skills hands-on, the ministries that are supporting these competitions actually have the opportunity to identify and approach them afterwards for recruitment.
Right, that's a little back end boost there too. I know if this is the same paper that you're talking about, I believe I read that, and one of the things that you looked at was the inspiration potentially to other countries. And I know here in the US, we have a lot of kind of capture the flag contests that are sponsored by private sector organizations. And then I know CISA has the President's Cup and a couple of ones, but like, how does that policy stack up to the US's policy? And then to the point in your paper, should this serve as an inspiration to other countries? Should they, try to divert a little bit from the model there, or what do you see?
Yeah, we find that, and we argue in the paper that China has so many national competitions that it's arguably just wasteful to have college students participate in 4 different national collegiate competitions for CTFs. The United States could do well with just one. And to your point, we have made a number of efforts and strides in that area. We have a lot of individually organized competitions that are public through the Centers of Academic Excellence program under the Department of Homeland Security and NSA's Cyber Centers of Academic Excellence. That said, the U.S. does not have a national collegiate level marquee competition that involves tens of thousands of college students. That said, we do have a robust, as you mentioned, environment for private sector competitions through DEF CON, CTF, etc. Our system is reflective of our approach and our culture to governance, and that is very decentralized. It is not command oriented. And so it's not surprising that we see China having many overlapping, arguably inefficient competitions, because there are many ministries competing for political favor and to say that they are complying with rules and regulations, et cetera, of the Chinese Communist Party.
Right. That's a good point. Okay, to your third point about looking at kind of the education sectors, workforce, can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that Xi Jinping did after coming into office was he changed this leading small group on informatization and cybersecurity to a standing committee of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. So this is one of 15 or so committees within the CCP Central Committee that meet on a regular basis. It's a pretty significant endorsement of their area as a policy priority. And one of the first things that organization did was order the reevaluation of cybersecurity degree curricula 15 based on the United States' National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. So PRC policymakers had seen the U.S. government under the tail end of the Bush administration into the Obama administration revamp U.S. cybersecurity degree curriculums. And then following the Snowden leaks, China became very aware of how good we were at that time at offensive cyber operations and signals intelligence collection. And so there were a lot of motivating factors for China to examine its own system and try to replicate the U.S. education system to its own benefit. And so we see that reflected in Chinese policy writing. And following that 2015 work conference that included, the Ministry of Education, et cetera, as well as a number of experts in the field of cybersecurity in China, they did reissue the degree requirements for cybersecurity degrees in 2015. And then in 2017, they began certifying some universities as world-class cybersecurity schools, which was modeled off of the Department of Homeland Security, NSA, a joint program for Centers of Academic Excellence in cyber operations. And so this is a very clear one-to-one of China saw what worked well for the United States in its talent development, and they took it and made it their own in their own systems. And that has led to not only increased numbers of students graduating from cybersecurity degree programs, but that those students are much more capable and well educated in their time at university.
Right. Yeah. The US influence there is notable for sure. All right. Well, Dakota, thank you so much for coming on to the Cyber 3 and talking about these three policies in China that has shaped the threat ecosystem.
Absolutely. It's great having you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. And to all of our listeners, please like and subscribe and share this video. Thanks so much.